Hello, my name is Brant Hunt, and my channel is called Discerning What is True. Uh, I'm sharing this today. That is the book by Alvin Kuhn called The Shadow of the Third Century. This will be chapter 10 I'll be reading today. Um, I wanted to express, I guess, basically give you an idea. I've been reading a little bit about Gerald Macy. Gerald Macy is it basically is like before Alvin Boyd Kuhn. I may have explained that a little bit to you in the past. So a lot of things that Alvin Boyd Kuhn discerned or learned, I should say, was from Gerald Macy, especially in the later part of his life. And some of the things that Gerald Macy speaks about that I find interesting and how we've been so tricked by so many things. This is this took place in 300, so you're talking about now. This is 1700 years ago. And it's only been what I call a very few people who have been brave enough to even research this information in the past and to find what we call the true history, so to speak. So what he says, Gerald Macy says, and we're going to go into him, but I've got so many books of Alvin Boyd Kuhn I want to read before I get into Gerald Macy. But what happens simply is that the concept of Jesus is actually to do with the Egyptian perspective. That is, and I talked about it even with Alvin Boyd Kuhn here. Jesus is not real. He's what we call, similar to what we call Osiris. Osiris was beforehand. And then later on, this is what took place. They created another name, so to speak, for the God, so to speak, or Savior. But I wouldn't even use that word. We won't say Savior. That's not a good word. But people don't see the connection because they don't know. I feel sorry for people who have have not studied these things or don't understand because it's been it's a big lie. A lot of this is a big lie. You know, the seminaries teach what they call the historical Jesus, the historical Christ, whatever you want to call it. So they believed in the living entity of Jesus, and that's not what the Gnostics believe or the Essenes believe. They did not believe in a literal Jesus at all. And so most people have been fooled in that recognition, and also the concept of hell. The concept of hell was invented to uh, threaten those who would not go along with this system of belief. You see, and we are that's that goes on, folks. This goes on to when we talk about the horrible things that took place in the Inquisitions and all types of things that did not believe in the Catholic particular perspective. People were killed for simply saying, "I don't believe in it." That would be it. I don't believe in your so-called Jesus, whatever your historical context, particular saying, and people were murdered because of that. You see that paints a picture real quick, folks. That paints a picture though, as though people think they know it all, but no more than that, they choose to take someone's life because they don't believe as they believe. You got to think about that because that's a very critical junction in your life because this is we are fortunate in some ways it's not that way now, although it is different in certain areas of the world. But this is what's happened in the past, and so this is what's happened. Part of it, and we'll get into more Gerald Macy. We'll get into him. So what I'm going to do is, I just want to express that to you. So, these all these connotations of what we call the historical Jesus. I mean, there was no historical Jesus. The Christian archaeologists who have been still searching, they're still searching because they can't find it. Because they think that the Bible is literally true. They're still looking for the ark. They're still looking for Solomon's temple. They're still looking for all these things that are supposedly written in the Bible, taking them literal, and they're not going to find it. They never will. And this is the this is 1700 years ago, so to speak. Actually, more than that. Supposedly 1900, so to speak. But you can see how this way, with Gerald Macy, how Paul and Peter dealt with certain things, and Paul is the Gnostic. Paul is the Gnostic here, and Peter is not. Peter is believing in the historical. Are those real names? No, those are not real names. Those are names that were given. We don't have any idea who they could be. I don't want to gesture. I don't have any idea. That's not the key point. But it's interesting that simply Paul has a completely different perspective. And the Bible can provide a lot of truth to people who've not been what I call programmed by the church or the belief systems. And I want to make it very clear that I grew up in that. Okay. I grew up that all my life, for over 40 years of my life. Okay. So it wasn't like I suddenly was on the other side over here. No, 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 no. I've been in the midst of all of it. Okay. So, and I've gone to seminary also and studied church history. But I believed it even then in some ways until I realized something wasn't right with Augustine's teachings and what I would call Pelagius. That's kind of the thing that kind of set it off. But that's not a major thing now. But that's what kind of set it off for me. And when I was in seminary, I said, I can't teach this. You know. So anyway, let's get into the book by Alvin Boyd Kuhn, simply called the whole idea with the third century, the shadow of the third century. What it is a shadow. It is a complete shadow. Darkness fell. They talk about simply is after these ages, roughly from 500 all the way up to 11 or 1200, basically is called the Dark Ages. In fact, basically, I would say from 500 to 1400, basically 1,000 years of darkness. Those were called the Dark Ages because basically nothing was being uh, produced or put out there, you see. And people were in darkness and they were under a certain belief system. So this is chapter 11. This is called the Great Ebb Tide. I think I wrote down the wrong chapter. I said chapter 10. I'm sorry. It's chapter 11. We'll change that later. At last, then the long buried truth emerges to view. Christianity was not a movement generated by a wholly new revelation of light, that is, much less of the first light kindled out of heaven to end previous earthly darkness. On the contrary, it was a popular sweep of a violent reaction that dragged truly sacred esoteric wisdom out of the what I would call hidden and inter sanctums and prevailed and wholesale to the people at large. However, heroically in its motive to disclose the secret knowledge to the poor, it was historically fatal in its consequences, for it contravened, ignored, and violated the inexorable ordinance of life that man can appropriate only what he has won and can utilize beneficiary only what he can handle with the sure precision of intelligence. Christianity must lauded gift of religion to the submerged groups ended by perpetuating and deepening that submersion for 17 centuries. The ignorantly manufactured tradition that Christianity rose from a sudden outburst of a new light in the heathen gloom is one of the most outlandish fabrications in the course of all human arrogancy. The claim of such an origin for this religious flies in direct contradictions of all irreplaceable laws that govern the evolution of movements in human society. The notion universally prevailed by Christian writers is that the religion sprang from no roots grounded in the past and owed nothing to the past. This is this is asserted to be true in spite of the fact that many books, as shall be noticed, do omit the adoption of much pagan or antecedent material into the Christian constitution. For even when such appropriation is omitted, the position is still always maintained that the Christians converted what is borrowed into first relevant meaning and utility, and thus redeemed it from a senseless void among the heathen to a high usage and import. The dogmatic plea is that Christians took up some of the old forms and doctrines of pagan uses, and for the first time invested them with the dignity of a true meaning and a dynamic good force. Associations to this effect abound. This is another of those many canars invented by the Christians that are as baseless as they are disingenuous, had gone out or dimmed low, I should say, before Christianity had its inception, but that the new religion, which soon agitated the popular mind, took up features whose esoteric sense had vanished, and restored to them that lost deeper significance, is as bald a falsehood as ever insinuate itself into the most depraved minds. The astonishing truth is almost the direct contrary of this. For the most part, it was the Christians who inherited past forms and liturgies, pushed out of focus or lost utterance every last vestige of a nobler esoteric interpretation, and substituted for that truer understanding their own gross literate or historical rendering. At any rate, when the body of ancient mythical and ritualistic presentations had passed through the ringer, so to say, of the process of revamping at Christian hands, it emerged stripped bare of any remaining esoteric significance. The charge that the pagans had enacted rites, that is rites, and mounted doctrines in entire ignorance of a noble sense behind them, and that the Christians elevated all this material, to lofty sublimity and saving intelligence, is quite the opposite of the truth. It has been shown that the very effect made by Origen, Clement, and to some degree Augustine to do something in this direction was violently repudiated by the Church, and similar effects have been summitedly smothered ever since. The most determined search is unable to find any authentic evidence that Christianity at any point instituted any improvement over pagan things. Rather, at every turn, it registered a movement from intelligence to ignorance, from better to worse, from lofty conceptions to degradation. The attempt to set forth is clear, I'm sorry, in clear, forth in clear light, the generating causes of Christianity. More properly, of course, Christianism. When you put an ISM at the end of the any word, populism, republicanism, whatever, it becomes a belief. Okay, this is a quick, it's a form of a belief system. So you have Christian and you have ISM on the end of it. It means to simply say belief system, just like it would be a democracy, not democracy, but republicanism, that type of thing, or others, or communism, you see, requires the making of a preliminary survey of the status of affairs and religion and culture prevailing before its birth. Well, this movement took its rise immediately out of the play of forces operative at the time and was not the product of a revelation from spiritual heavens. It is an assumption that it was a new effigy of celestial light that had prevented the attempt to explain it on the usual grounds of historical influences at work in background and in environment. It was definitely a earth-born surge of religious feeling as any in history. Indeed, it was less heaven-born than most, in the sense that a stir engendered among the ignorant is less divine than one generated in the upper ranges of intelligence. Assuredly, Christianity grew out of the religious situation of its day and its past. That situation must be scrutinized with regard to its actualities and scrupulously of truth-telling, apparently, not according to it before. Now, let me explain something here. Once this became a Catholic perspective, that is the belief in Christianity, they had the power to print. They had the power to destroy the libraries. So when you destroy a library, folks, what would you do that for? What would be the fear? What would cause that? Why would you destroy a library? Oh yes, most of the time is to destroy truth or destroy something that keeps people from finding out the truth, isn't it? Ask that question. You need to ask that question seriously, folks. Not only in Alexandria, there are other places along in Greek days and in Roman days. There was the same thing happened. There were certain libraries that were destroyed. Why would you do that? Why would you cover up something? That's what you're doing, isn't it? Continue on. The background screen against which it is all to be thrown is, of course, the rule of the esoteric spirit, the true custodianship of culture as outlined here, intelligence and passionate love of truth for its own sake, or divine philosophy, as the Greeks dominated it, exercised its rightful hegemony over the field of thought, sending it benignantly raised as far down from the apex of eagle's eye apperception, that is, as it was able to penetrate into the area of the general mind. Veiled it in myth, allegory, and symbol and other arcade forms, and kept in pretty strict secrecy, it reached only a select group of the best qualified. Nevertheless, the interventory bent of the masses to ape or respect the aristocracy of wealth, position, or intelligence provided a bridge that is narrow enough, no doubt, by which some of the aura and the incidents of culture could pass down to the masses. In the face of Christian statements to the contrary, it must be affirmed that the cultivation of esoteric wisdom by the intellectual aristocratic group system in the pagan world did not leave the masses in such destitution of sane and balanced views of religion as has always been alleged. General standards of thought and understandings were high, much higher in such a land such as Greece than they were when philosophical interests got out of hand, slipped from the control of the few, and ran their rampant course among the people. At least it is evident from history itself that while the Hellenistic philosophical culture dominated the scene, there is not to be found anything comparably to the emotional extravagantness of religious pietism, violence of religious fanaticism that came with the Christian upsurge. If it is recorded as many as 30,000 people assembled to witness a certain of the dramatic representations, easy word to say, of the dramatic representations produced in the celebration of the festivals of the Eleusinian mysteries, that's spelled Eleusianian. It is a evidence that the influence of the few intellectuals were both powerful and edifying generally. All, of course, depending upon the mental development of the people themselves as to how far and how beneficiary the arcane wisdom propagated by the secret brotherhoods could penetrate and leaven the mass mind. It is legitimate to contend that if the so-called upper class of society is highly enlightened with a true and elevating philosophy, the people beneath cannot utterly fail to be benefited. A society which can produce Plato and Aristotle must itself be permanently by their light. When vision does not fail, the people will not perish. Christianity, this work claims, was produced by a force and a spirit that found expression and character under the influences that prevailed when vision had failed. That failure of vision, its causes and consequences must now be canvassed. Christianity surged forth when a lamented and tragic recession of a high tide, perhaps the very highest tide in the period of known history of a philosophical culture that is still the brightest glory of human civilization, had reached the nadir of its cycle. Among the most informing of all studies should be the efforts to account for the failure of high development after touching the apex of its advance. In the dearth of exact knowledge of this phenomenon, resort resort must be phenomenal resort must be had to the broad principle that human culture, like everything else in the life movement, advances cynically, rhythmically, or in waves. It rises high and sinks back. It crests, form, and breaks at a given point. They do not run steadily in the same form, like the surf on the beach. They gather their forces, take their form, spend their energy in one climatic surge, and die away. Rhythmically, another follows. The streets of Athens are devoid of groups listening to Socrates now. The streets of Florence harbor no mighty artists or humanities now. The inns of London toast no Shakespeare, no Johnsons, sorry, Dr. Johnsons, Boswells, Goldsmiths, Wordsworth, layman's England's need of Milton. Even Concord is silent without the oracle voices of Emerson, Thoreau, and Hawthorne. Culture surges to heights, then recede. Brilliancy does not reproduce itself. Culture is not static. What is to be adduced here for its weighty import is that Greek philosophy came at and as the culminating point of perhaps the highest tide of uplift in human culture. And Christianity came at its lowest point of the recession of that wave. If it is possible to ascertain and delineate the particular features that conducted to the lofty development in the ages of Pericles, Pericles, as well as those that were in manifestations when the Hellenistic light declined, it should be done. What lighted that lamp, and why did it not burn longer or continuously? Here indeed is the crux of the matter. The world is condemned because it did not receive the light when it came. Equally, it is worthy of blame for not having kept the lamp trimmed and burning once the flame was kindled. The world is always clamoring for new light. This is silly, seeing that it has not held the great light it so abundantly received of old. That's true, folks. It's very true. I've had people tell me, philosophy is, dead. It's not important today. Really? You see, people old, people say, oh, they're old people. They're, these people, we don't need them anymore. That type of attitude doesn't go far, folks. Calamity takes place when that type of attitude and attitudes that people have. And it's very arrogant to make those type of statements because you don't know it all. No one knows it all, folks. You see, this is silly, seeing that it has not held the great light it so abundantly received of all. In other words, they had their opportunity here, is what he's saying, and they missed out. They failed to continue on and continue to lead and lead and lead, eventually, you see. And you'll notice it in history. I'll say this right quickly. You'll notice it simply is during the Renaissance that changed. The light came back on. Why is that? Because they started reading and looking into art and information that basically was kept from them. And it was actually the universities that did this. This is how it got started. It didn't come from the churches, folks. It did not come from the churches. Okay? The glory beam once again. What the blind and fatal stupor of the human mind has dimmed it and has lost it again. There is no surely that if a Christ comes to give light to the world would either accept it or retain it. It has been given and renewed again and again, only to die out as often. A significant saying of the Lord in the Hindu books is, quote, as often as piety and religion decay among men, I send my messenger to revive them, end quote. The great age of crowning glory in philosophical culture came with Pythagoras and Plato, flared in the sky of human thought, and died out in the succeeding age. 600 years later, when the darkness had settled again over the Hellenistic world, the spiritual custodians made a supreme effort to rekindle the Platonian flame. Forth again flared the gleam and brilliancy, even perhaps surpassing its original glory or glow. In the schools of Amnius Saccharus, in the writings of Ponius, Lamblesius, Porphyria, Proclus, and the esoteric successors of Philo. Neoplatonism gave the world its light again. If there is a hierarchy of spiritual counseling and that exercises some supervision over the period culturally revivalification of the world, it can be reasonably assumed that this outburst of Platonic esotericism in the 3rd century of the Christian era was the deliberate engineering of effort to stop the horrendous blighting of all deep wisdom by the Christian rising, which was with sickening speed closing all minds to the impact of the spiritual mystery teaching. Just like it is today, folks. Like the last 150 years here in the country, here in America, in the West, the light's out. The light is out. This is why we have unbelievably all things are going on around us, because no one can think anymore. No one can add, can figure it out. They can't see what's going on because they're blind. They're completely blind. So it's also my place here. Which was with sickening speed closing all minds to the impact of the spiritual mystery teachings, as it descended from the lofty apprehension of myth and allegory to blunt dead literalism of the scripture's sort word. Why these things happen is because simply people forget. They're no longer taught what is really important in school and in colleges. I saw that in my own time. Oh, yeah, I go to school for education, that is to get a job, not for me educating myself and understanding the higher things. Not about philosophy, no, not about logic, no. We're not interested in that. I want money, you see. I want to make money. And that's where we're at. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure this out, folks. But too late it came, and the horrible debauchery crashed to its full ruin. The ignorant masses had begun their march, and the voice of esoteric sanity could not make itself heard to halt them. Down into the dark ages plunged the Western world. The story of this chapter must be the descent of human culture from Platonic heights to medieval depths. This great world cataclysm has hardly ever been made the subject of intensity, or at any rate, enlightened study. Gibbon's great history is a sidelong approach to it. Christianity, of course, has resented his truthful exposition of his own low character, his disingenuous motivation, and his fanatic violence. But the dismal recension of culture after Plato has not gone unnoticed. It's descant upon the numerous investigators, if it and far from the exhaustive and discerning treatment. But one of the most astute of modern scholars has immortalized a phase that was hit upon by him to express the salient idea that describes the fatal decline. Readers in this field are well acquainted with Sir Gilbert Murray's famous description term for it, the failure of, quote, Greek nerve. In its broad connotation, it's well characterized what is set forth here. But his breadth of meaning needs delineation to move specifically, particularly, that is, what is that Sir Gilbert wishes us to understand in his word nerve? It is indeed a well-chosen term. It connotes such qualities as courage and self-reliance to fight out the issues of life's battles. Its most central concept, however, is that it embraces this resolute facing of life struggle and reliance upon the resources within the scope of man's own nature and constitution, without falling back upon extravagant aids or depending upon what might be called a necessity from a power entirely outside of man's prerogative. To keep this stout, quote, nerve, philosophically speaking, was to fight the good fight in the might of his human wisdom, guided and enlightened by the diviner wisdom, germinate, resident, and potential perfected within his own sphere of consciousness and direction. This nerve held men fast to the high and true philosophical idea of waging the Armageddon battle of the evolution on the terms set as conditioned by life and deity themselves, demanding the exercise that would bring the unfoldment of these interpotentialities of insight and knowledge, thus that must govern the growth of the whole man in the end, not to use them, but to let them be, or I should say, let them lie untried and unproven, while looking helplessly outside for help. When God had placed that sword of the Spirit immediately within man's own constitution, was to fail both man and God at the only point at which God superior power stands within man's actual reach and influence. To abandon or to fail in this resolution is to stand in battle with the weapons God has provided for this express contingency. And to surrender the battle front and retreat is a mission of helplessness, and then in servile mood to call upon external powers to save oneself is what the scholars meant by the loss of nerve on the point of the Greek world. It is notable and only too true analysis of the rudeful epod. It was this demoralization of the human courage and Elon, inspired by Greek philosophy, that prepared the ground for the upspringing of the fantastical degenerate Christianism. This failure of nerve, not only in Greece, but everywhere, should be the subject of the keenest research by all students of human currents, for it draws the rough sketches of the nature of every deterioration or backsliding of religious culture. It announced the prime criterion of all culture, since it defines culture to be the exercise, the growth, and perfected beneficiary use of the divine powers potential in man. The moment then that the central intelligence in the human being falls so short in competent knowledge as to give over the resolution to employ and deploy the resources provincially made available within its reach, and to run its two sources to help allegedly suitable outside the sphere of initiative. Man in such deplorable state resigns the lordship of the only God who can save him, and that's little g, and sinks in abject surrender to the mercies of elementary powers and the forces of nature. Indeed, Paul tells us that before we have risen in evolution to the point of consciousness of our own mastery of the forces drawing the chariot of our advance to deity, quote, we were in bondage to the elementary elements of the earth, end quote, and of the air, or the, quote, elements of the world. The divine gift of the spiritual soul linked in with our mortal components was to lift us above the subversion and helplessness under nature's law, to give us conscious command command of our own growth through a awakening powers of the free spirit of truth, which should lead us into all truth. You see, there's got to be a hunger for truth here, folks. If you're not hungry for truth, nothing's going to happen. It's just not. It's not going to work that way, you see. Once developed and set to its task of rulership, this Holy Spirit, or Paracleve, man's eternal comforter, dare not be surrendered. For man to do so is for him to surrender his divine to the power of his elementary nature in him, or it is the cosmic prerogative of the divine to rule the natural. In the realm of such mental cultures of, that is, religion and philosophy, it is to surrender understanding and knowledge to emotion, the possibility of wisdom, and sure guidance to faith. And this surrender is what crept like a posse over the area of Hellenistic Plato. With philosophy in decadency, there was nowhere available the sufficient knowledge of fortitude men with the courage to stand in the might of their divine donated and front life with yeoman heroism of the spirit. Man surrendered his divine sword and ran in fear and rout to God, the God not in his own selfhood, but the God in remote heavens, end quote. In conformity with the usual outcome of unintelligent religionism, the devotee abandoned earth as the place where vital values and salvation can be won, and looked and flee to heaven. The flight of religion from earth to heaven for the realization of supreme values has with never an exception marked the divorcement of religion from philosophy, of faith from knowledge, and perhaps no short description can so well delineate the decline and fall of true religion as the shifting of the locale or point of focus of true values in the spiritual life of man, not to wage life engagement, but to flee it for the happier land beyond the tomb, becomes man's objective. This, of course, paralyzes further initiative and with the budding flower of the soul's life. See, it's our responsibility. You have to have a love for truth. You just got to pursue it. It's all that's left. It's your foundation in all of life, every bit of it. It's not here for here and now, so to speak, but I mean, it's for the progression of all things, you see. Those fruits were simply given to us, even in this country, in the West, long ago. But look around you now. You see, there's no love of truth. Everything is completely do whatever you want to do, you know. The prime objective of original sound religion was to focus the battle for values here in the world and inside the conscious human sphere. A religion of decadencies, that is, decadence, made violent with undisciplined emotion and bereft of philosophical knowledge, always distracts man's vision from its true objective here. Thus, all such errant religious upheavals, you see, sidetracks man from the proper road of his evolution, leave him to wallow in the mire of his own wild propensities and stagnate his upward drive to divinity. We used to say, I remember something even long ago when I was in grade school, the divine spark. The divine spark is still in man, but he refuses to ignite it. He refuses to actually pursue these things. He's caught up in what I would call making money, you see, as though that is that type of thinking. He no longer is interested in philosophy. He's not interested in truth at all. But that will lead to the failure of all of society and civilizations, folks. That's just the way it works. It is true that Murray does not paint the same picture of the failure of nerve as it is here done. He sees it as a failure of hope and confidence in Greek people to achieve the better earthly life through national governments and mundane institutions. He sees it as the disillusionment of the philosophers in their dream of such realization and their consequent retirement from the collective outward effort into the solitary seeking of spiritual comfort and contact with God in the depths of his own retreats and their own souls. It represents to Murray an abandonment of communal effort in society to institute the perfect state, such as what Plato's Republic was, and to elevate man as a whole and outwardly, and a withdrawal in despair from the enterprise to the seclusion of the life of contemplation. It was a dereliction from all social brotherhood to the single chance of saving oneself. But all this is only a further extension of what our thesis presents. It was still a shift of the heft of aim and endeavor from earth to heaven. The heaven is in this case a man's own mystical nature. You see, our delineation took the shift to the heaven of expectation beyond the earthly scene. For Christianity did later transfer this locus of divine realization from earth entirely. Teaching its devotees to abandon hope of it here and court it assiduously for the life to come. The failure of nerve was real enough both in Murray's analysis and in ours. The downfall of Christianity came in the form and features of a surrender of philosophy to religion. It is a parallel phenomenon in the life of a nation, race, or a age to a similar manifestation in the life of an individual. Indeed, it is the reduplication on a collective scale of a change of attitude that nearly every person goes through in his intellectual growth in his lifetime. In youth, the mind looks forward to the dreams and possibilities of actually worldly achievement. Plans are made to accomplish many things. Ideal goals are set to attainment. It seems to youth that ideal program of reform or advancement can be made or can be carried through to success if only people will unite to effect them. Philosophy points the way and charts the principles of right action, though. The mind stakes all on such a philosophy and loyalty and sincerely commit the individual to action for it. But age changes time. Hope, confidence wane as time goes on and his expositions of the solidity, the weakness, and the treachery of humans in the mass weigh down the sanguine spirit. At last, courage is shattered by doubt, fear, disappointment, and the stout heart quakes. The nerve fails. The individual surrenders the fight and falls back on God, his private refuge. We are witnessing of this turn back to religion of one one after another, no living person, not to mention thousands of lesser ones, is quite accurately and scientifically described as an aspect of a real second childhood, end quote. Middle manhood makes a valiant effort to achieve success under its own power, on its own resources. The effort being generally thought a failure and personal strength waning, the individual reverts back to the mental trust in a higher power. That was the native institute of a sorry, not an institute, instinct of childhood. Then it was unconscious. Now it is not only conscious but rationalized. If the child leaves his father's house or migrating to Earth and forgets his potential home after childhood, he just as naturally turns back to it as he nears the end of the journey abroad. It is the homing institute, a divine nostalgia, you see. In the Herculean age, that is the soul of Greece, ventured heroically to achieve the good life by means of its own great genius and insight. It had picked up the true keys from Egypt. It strove with courage and clear vision to chart the course of action that would achieve the good life among humans generally. No historical effort to this end was ever better grounded, but it was like the high moment of inspiration of the artist, the poet, the diviner of beauty. It could not be sustained at a high pitch over long. The delicate pose and harmony of the elements of body, mind, and soul requisite to channel smoothly and powerfully the forces of such exaltation cannot be held indefinitely. New souls enter who change the rhythm and precipitate discords. The glow of genius, the flame of the divine, dies away to be replaced by lower and less beautiful expressions. The tension is too high to hold long. The soul takes refuge again for a time in mediocrity. So the great age of philosophy of divine illumination fades out after Plato. The Mid-East world, the Hellenistic people, saw the light grow dim. The divine child of Christly genius was again to be threatened with being devoured by the apod, reptile of brutish ignorance and dull human inertia. Sut was to win another victory over Horus. Satan was to grin mockingly at the Christos on earth, a mount of temptation. And what might the dragon of darkness breed in the time of this his triumph? What monstrous prodigy of diabolical frenzy might it now generate? What hybrid offspring of the incestuous mating of faith and folly might it not bring forth? Life, the horrid Minotaur, fathered by animal passion and mothered by natural instinct? The decline of erudite philosophy took the divine principle out of the human compound and left man to wallow in his own bootless groping, or to throw himself abjectly on the mercies of an external deity. Man threw up his hands, abandoned his job of self-evolution, ignored the God within his own being. That's true, folks. God is within you. And ran helplessly like a child back to the Heavenly Father. Vision had again failed, and the people were destined to perish in an age of darkness. For the monstrous product of a union of faith and ignorance was to come forth to the form of a misshapen creature, whose brutal power over the Western millions for 20 centuries was destined to derationalize the human mind with morbid hallucinations beyond belief. In a notable passage in the book called The Natural Genesis, Volume 2, page 497, Massey, as Gerald Massey, asked how it was that the religion of the ignorant overturned and superseded that of the learned. He attributed it chiefly to the secrecy and elusive guardianship of the arcane wisdom. Quote, the religion of mystery was doomed to die of the secrecy in which it had been self-enshrined. It was buried alive with its own seal on its own mouth. It was an unpublished religion. End quote. This factor played some part, no doubt. It deprived the people of its assumed good and irradiated them. Still, secretly had not killed the Masonic order, and the Christian ecclesiastic system had maintained its place and influence largely by keeping its scriptures and its history and its most esoteric policy a secret from its own members. Secrecy is only a facet of a more arrogant, secrecy is only a facet of a more adequate answer. The fuller analysis revealed that finally the intelligent failed that might have kept arcane knowledge alive in philosophical schools and academies. There is required almost as much genius to perpetuate a flashing message as to originate it. The Platonic, the Orphic, the Hermetic wisdom is shining in the pages of books in dusty shelves at the moment. Alas, the vision to discern it and evaluate it in wanting even now. Philosophically, the love of wisdom is grievously lacking. The Bible itself, a tomb rich in cosmic and anthropological truth, is unbounded circulation at this day. Again, at last, it is still a book sealed up by the ignorance of even the theologians who pose as its founders. Pose. Because they don't know. They don't understand it, you see. The mere existence of great truth in print does not by any means guarantee assimilation by the world. Its circulation in the veins of the body of world consciousness. Gerald Massey reason is convicted inadequately by what he himself says in the next sentence that states, quote, the new set put forth the same dogmas, the doctrines, the tenets under the same types, accompanied by the same rites and ceremonies, and thus became the first publishers of the ancient religion with a new interpretation of the Christ made flesh. The Gnostics did try to say, with the suppressing hand on their mouths, quote, you are only publishing our secrets with a lying gloss put on them, end quote. But this slight profess was unheard amidst the loud clamor of the fanatical ignorant, end quote. He has said that the archaic wisdom of the Gnostic died or killed itself from the self-imposed lack of publication and dissemination. Then he tells us that the new set of Christians came along and published it, and that he claims killed it. It is a weird logic that holds that a system died both from publication and non-publication. The thesis profit here is that its publication with a false interpretation attached killed it. What Massey rightly has in mind here, no doubt, is that the failure to publish it with the true esoteric interpretation, by which alone its continued beneficially influence could be prolonged, led to its falling into destitute for want of supporters and propagandists among those qualified, whereas on the other hand, its publication, quote, with a lying gloss put upon it, end quote, by the ignorant literizers of spiritual representation beyond their comprehension, did kill it by reducing it to innate nonsense. This republication on or broadcasting to the world for the first time of the literature of the wisdom hitherto held in secrecy was the generating cause of Christianity. This is almost certainly the first time since Massey's books that this item of history has been achieved in any work essaying to print the true Christian origins. But it is a declaration that needs an immense and elaborate ensemble of precise, authentic data to substantiate it and vindicate it against the denials that will assail it. Even before the ink of the statement has dried, it must be added as a necessary qualification that it was the republication of the arcane or secret wisdom, not by any means its true form of either presentation or comprehension, but pitifully caricatured and mutilated by incompetent interpretation, with a lying gloss put upon it, that generated the sweep of erratic religionism that became Christianity. We have indeed the sharpest and most instructional contrast here before us between two movements, pushing forward at nearly the same time, the one proceeding with a start of about 2 centuries over the other, but then overlapping it. The first Christianism, that is, the second Neoplatonism. Both published essentially the same doctrinal system, you see. This will be vocaciously denied, to be sure, yet it is the truth, and has been seen, hinted at, or openly omitted by many religious historians. The reason it has not been clearly evident to all is that the one called Christianism presented it in a glossy, garbled, and misshapen form as it had already been corrupted by a vulgar unintelligence. As given out by the Christians, it resembled to its pristine form as Neoplatonism is almost completely obliterated. In fact, its mutation and disfigurement had already progressed so far that the general historian is hardly to be censored for not knowing that the one was the hyper child of the other. This work will add accumulated data to prove this contention, namely that Christianity was a reissuing or resurgent of Platonic systematism, but so frightfully managed by a misconception of its interior messages and its cryptic language as to be unrecognizable in its language. You see, the two systems really dealt with essentially the same body of ancient wisdom. The one gave out a marvelous elaboration of the loftiest conceptualism possible to the human brain. It could be received in a high truth only by the best disciplined minds among the people. So it's for the few. Okay, it's for the few. That's just talking about again Platonic perspective, philosophy. It could be okay. It could be received in its high truth only by the best disciplined minds among the people. Okay, I'm sorry. The other gave out the mere husk or shell of the mighty philosophy and the dynamic ritual that dramatized its impelling truths, and it became, as we shall see, the inciting motivation of the most rabid religious fanaticism. The massive instructions or moral of this datum or episode in history has not been caught at any time. Its sensationally enlightening lessons should be grasped now and never lost again. But it will still be pointed out and jibed at how abjectly the publication of a Neoplatonism failed the world, and how triumphantly Christianity swept in to reach the masses whom Neoplatonists could not help. The jibe and the boast are precisely the two things which this work is designed to reveal in their bald falsity. It is the aim here to show just what the apparent failure of Neoplatonism and the apparent rampant triumph of Christianity actually meant to the latter course of history and calamity and woe. The matter is simply one of point of view as to the value of the significance of this failure and this triumph. It is the wholly unique view here, advanced with challenging data as proof, that this, quote, failure of Neoplatonism and its resulting outcome in the upsurge of naive Christianism, in spite of much incident gone, in the upsurge of that, in spite of much incidental good attributable to the latter in its history, constituted the direst catastrophe in the historical period. It can be readily shown that the same default of high mentality that led to the dissuasion of Neoplatonism, or its failure to lead the succeeding ages in culture, was the source spring of neoscience that produced the monstrous, misguided zealotry known as Christianity. The absolute, imminent, even indisputable interrelation between the failure of Platonic revival and the outbursts of pious but unphilosophical religiously in the 3rd century is the prime text of this book and needs infinite recognition and attention, for it determined the whole texture of succeeding history and has cast its gloomy shadow even down upon the events of today. No one can comprehend the meaning of events in the world today. This was done, folks. This was written over 150 years ago. Look what kind of quagmire this country's in the Western world. Look around you. Open your eyes. People are destitute. I don't mean that money-wise. I'm talking about simply spiritually. No one can comprehend the meaning of events in the world today, and religion is the open or hidden, quote, usually hidden cause of most events. Who does not know the truth of what occurred back in those first centuries, when not even the more open republication of the sacrificing troops of the subliminous wisdom known to man availed to stop the swift rush of human thought from noblest balance and vision down into various idiocies, turning its cryptical myths and dramas and symbolic language into the fantastic parade of alleged history. This is unspeakable tragedy we would defeat. Even when later the errant absurdities of literal interpretation drove the defenders to Hellenistic philosophy for saner elucidations of its scriptures and creeds, it remains that the touch of popular religionism on the body of the esoteric arcane transformed it into a terrible caricature and a travesty of its real self. The anomaly, the anomaly of all history is that Christian writers have harped intermittently upon the fortune escape of Christianity from the threat of being dominated by the same Hellenistic esoteric philosophy, and so losing its power to sweep the masses in hysterical and dementia. Anything, let me just say something, folks. Anything that is popular is to by the masses is the wrong way down the road. Period. Period. In any way, religiously, politically, you know, philosophically, if the masses go along with it, it's gone because they cannot figure it out and they're dependent upon others, and they don't have any idea. They just agree with who they've been told to, and they do it because they can't think. Likewise, they have with equal unanimity pictured the dire fate of Western civilization of the Greek wisdom systems, later made the basis of Christian doctrinism itself, and now prized by high-bred academy thinkers as they summit itself of human sagacity, and even exalted by these such churchmen as Dean Inge, I've never heard of it, I-N-G-E, Dean Inge, had come to dominate the thought life of Europe instead of the fake cult of a deadly regiment of ecclesiastical power. Nobody can say what history would have been under changed influences. One can only surmise with some flourish of logic, but it would be hard to find a system still determining the psychological destinies of millions so tied in knots and tangles of contradictory claims, logical inconsistencies, and impossible historical developments as this one called Christianity. What external causes in Greek history combined to diminish interest in the lofty salities of the Hellenic mind must be left in the investigator of such things. It will always be a question whether the cause of decay inhered in the wisdom systems themselves, in the impact of outer events, or in the deterioration of human quality after Plato. The great tide that lifted the Greek intellect to a mountain peak of lucrative vision swept on by and left the world to sink back in a sorry state of deflation and jejuni philosophical interests. The Dark Ages had begun, and the twilight following the bright day of Plato's reign. But it was 500 years before the dust darkened into the night and gave birth to the dementia that then fastened itself like a obsessive manna upon the West for another direful 2,000 years. And we still haven't woken up, folks. If this pronouncement seems too strong, it is enough in the main to justify it with the simple, irrefutable historical fact that the ecclesiastical power that this darkened outlook generated absolutely clamped a chain upon the free use of the rational mind of the Western world for at least a millennia and a half. 1,500 years. This is a statement, he says that. It's been still longer, we'll see. But anyway, that's what he says. That makes sense. It's been over 150 years, basically. Not quite. Take back 100 years, maybe. Oh, this is a statement of historical fact freely made by many a professor in great universities in Europe and America today. Additional proof of its correctness in the single fact that in the brief period since the Occidental mind has liberated itself from the strangling tyranny, it has made advances in science and general knowledge incomparably vast in comparison with all the gain made during these 1,600 years of the ecclesiastic despotism. Indeed, that despotism has completely stagnated the course of European thinking. The free mind was stifled by the enforced rule of uncritical belief and imposed dogma. But that monstrous tyranny stood with club in hand ready to beat down every reappearance of independent thought, action, or any republication or publication of solid scientific fact that would give the lie to its rigid dogmas, based weirdly upon a literal interpretation of the scriptures. The investigation requires us to look now at a world carried far down by the time of the first century AD, in a deep trough of the receding wave of Platonic uplift. There we must seek to locate the immediate productive causes of the Christian faith. It demands careful scrutiny, and much of the data has been obliterated. When the great light of esoteric understanding had been almost completely extinguished, the Hellenistic world lay in the state of defenselessness, easily to be seduced by any religious appeal that might be made to it. A keen rationalistic philosophy is the only or the final, quote unquote, guardian power able to save people from falling a prey to irrational religious inculcations, and the steadily gyroscope was now in nearly total abeyance. The whole population lay fatally vulnerable to the influence of whatever cult fever might seize them at any moment. This situation, however, is by no means unique in world history. A replica of it is extant in this present epoch. The complexity of things in this field of human interest differs little from one age to another. In any age, there is found a vast and weird diversity of all sorts of religious cults, each expressing some phase of doctrinal or mystic or ceremony infatuation. This is this is as true of New York, Los Angeles, London today as it was in Alexandria, Antioch, Ephesus of the first century AD. Christianity itself started out not as a movement of a single group, but as a ferment among a large number of different cults. There was a wide variety of divisions among them, including several diversifications of the Gnostics, who are accredited to the Christian movement, even if it hereditarily classified. Platonius in his Ethies, spelled Enneads, has spent his scathing reprobation upon cults or cultists of a number of semi-philosophical or semi-mystical groups that remind one of such organizations of today as the Christian Science or New Thought movement, the Unity movement, the Divine Science movement, the Spiritual Science, and the like. Each had doubtless caught some prominent aspect of philosophy and emphasized it to their exclusion of other necessary elements. This tendency to magnify one facet of truth into a whole philosophy led to that limitation of view, which breeds bigotry and intolerance. So these groups that we see here, people think, okay, the marriage of Christian Science is one of them. You see, the New Thought movement, which took place probably 1820, 1830s, the Unity movement. I don't know anything about divine science or spiritual science, but you see the marriage of, they use the word spiritual science and Christian as though they're wedding it together, you see. But it didn't get the whole picture, folks. It just took only a smidge of it, a piece of it. Didn't eat the whole cake, so to speak. It just ate part of it. This tendency to magnify one facade of truth into a whole facade led to that limitation, which breeds bigotry and intolerance. I said that, I'm sorry. Here has always lain the danger of religious ideologies and convictions. A half vision of truth entails almost certain bias, disproportionate error, and wreckage. In the system of the great seers like Plato and Aristotle, the principle of disproportionate was indeed a fatal factor, the record of all true happiness and justice. Socrates came to define the good life as that in which all the elements of consciousness, indeed all things, were held related to each other in a certain exact measure and proportion. The golden mean between the two extremes was the path of wisdom leading to virtue and to happiness. Every doctrine must be balanced in that pose between under and overemphasis that alone guarantees its rightness. Perhaps this is what, at last, the crucifixion of the Christ between two thieves can mean in a profoundly abstract scene. And it's not literal, folks. The force pulling on each side of any true view or position always steals something away from the truth. Wow. It robs the truth of its just measure and balance. So in other words, we're talking about the middle path here again, aren't we? And the weakening of basically being pulled by the right or left, one at each side here. This may mean little to the unreflective mind, but it is something that every deep thinking philosopher comes to realize, as Socrates did, namely that the truth always stands balanced on the narrow ridge between too much and too little. You see, there has to be a love of truth, but there also has to be a love of love. You see, you have to be able to have, you got to balance those things, you see. As courage is the golden mean between reckless as excess and cowardice as deficiency, so true religion is the golden mean or exact balance between fanatic devotion as excess and spiritual deadness as deficiency. Virtue is devotion to good, determined by intelligence and restraint from both extremes by the exercise of the ultimate delicacy of understanding. All decisions fall at the midpoint between pro and con. People are unconscious of the operation of this principle in daily life. Yet it is the nub of all decisions. All action is between right and wrong, prudent or reckless. The shrewd student comes at last to evaluate all historical movements in the light of this basic law. Nearly all historical events can be appraised at the result of the reaction of masses or individuals from excess in one direction to excess in the opposite. History is mostly a record of the swing of the pendulum, first too far towards the excessive zeal, then too far over to the curbing. Life, so to say, gathers too much steam, then releases it too sharply. It's like, it goes way over here and just go wham, type of thing. The philosopher is he who strives to hold the balance even between the two poles. This is why Plato dramatized the chariot of life, driven by the noetic principle of higher intelligence as being drawn by two horses. To keep the two exactly even pace was the condition of happy motoring. Quote, failure to do so, the mince of records or the penalty of no advance, weak people, undeveloped souls do little. Do little here where we lost it. But swing helplessly back and forth from violent action to equally violent reaction. The philosopher essayed to disregard the strong pulls in every direction, in either direction, and to hold the balance between them. He calls upon reason. Or his diviner faculty to stem and curb the rabbit throes of his emotional nature. This epitomized the moral side of the great Greek philosophy, which asserting that in man there are two natures, the animal human and the divine human. Exhorted the wise man to exalt the divine to rulership over the human, so as to hold all elements in balance. Transfer to the area of religion, this high philosophy would dictate the control of emotionalism by divine reason. Lacking its presence and operation, religious movements have been just the procession of one emotional flare after another. The virus of the infatuation or hypnotization runs in exact proportion to the deficiency of philosophical knowledge. The less philosophical a movement is, the more religious it is. The world after Plato's day was filled with a melange of religions that closely parallel those endless divisions of cults and sects found today. One springs from another in reaction to sharper differentiation. Each has sprung from the independent leadership of some one vigorously thinker. People become the sheep that follow some likely shepherd. But the leader, where did he pick up the system that would attract the following? You see. Answer that leads into the field of our proper searching. The truth is that each formulator of a system has made some contact, deep or shallow, with antecedent preachment. He has found brilliant light shining in some ancient document and saw that it would revitalize current low thinking. The real source then traced back and back. Always research brings one face to face with the existence of a primeval revelation of initial wisdom. Tradition postulates as having been vouchsafed in remote times from demigods to men. The scripture speaks of it in having been an original dictation of God to holy men of old. End quote. This compares perfectly with the occult tradition. It is envisioned properly, meaning that holy men of old, quote, could embrace such exalted figures as Pythagoras and Plato, Hermes, Orpheus, Zoroaster, Krishna, and the Buddha. The question whether the dictating God was deity in some anthropomorphic shape or just the evolved divinity within the minds of such men is not too important. The presupposition that is, quote, holy men of old, end quote, were human involved to near divine status far better satisfied the human zeal for a concrete understanding and providing a way visible to reason. Any other elaboration falls beyond human conception as to modus and agency. It's predictable that all the various schools stem by one line of successive propagation of another from a reverse system of high truth delayed related to early humanity. This can surely be assumed in that true religion which already existed, end quote. From farthest antiquity that Augustine averted came to he called Christianity in his day. This clarification was vital elements in the long last story of the true origin of Christianity. It exemplifies how a unity of organic thought in the minds of demigods can and will be broken up into an endless diversity of segmentation as it passes through multiple minds of less and less keen visions. The gods see true whole. Okay, I'll say it again. The gods see truth whole. They see it complete. That is, limited human mentality sees it only in parts. You see, religions are thus the facets of one primal religion. Some so badly distorted out of relation to the structure entirely as to hardly phases or truth at all. It takes profound and luminous focus of intelligent sight to integrate all rays into the full original brilliance, the merging of all colors back into the white light demanded the most rapid movement of thought sustained at high frequencies. The average human never possesses this heightened power. His religion, therefore, will always represent a partial view. He does not see life truly because he does not see it whole. It is the work of the philosophers to see things not separately, but as elements related harmoniously in a transient unity of structure, as Kant so insisted. What then was Christianity as its short start? True history can now be written. It was conglomerate, loose groupings of a number of various cults out of the total number of such in existence in the first century. The chief binding or unifying force subsisting between them was the tendency to emphasize a popularization of the various tenets in the interest of mass edification as distinct from mystery cult exclusiveness. So you see how, it's just getting a crowd bigger and bigger, it's getting bigger and bigger, it doesn't matter, da da da. See, which is not what you want, but that's what most movements are about. It was a movement inspired largely by resentment and revolt against the intellectual aristocrats, end quote. As before noted, it was a trend in itself laudable when rightly envisioned to extend more widely the participation of the common people in the deeper spiritual wisdom held in custody by the intelligentsia who handled the mysteries. It can be granted without too much dispute that by the time of the mysteries have fallen to a low state of knowledge, refinement, and purity, naturally the receding wave of the grand Platonic uplift had brought deterioration into the personnel and intelligence of the mysteries. They were bound to suffer some of the impact of the general depravity settling in upon the Hellenic world. The, the degradation may have crept in to reduce to revolting status some of the mystic rites of symbolic or dramatic character. Phallic symbolism and ritualism dramatizing creative process such as form part of the Buddhist ceremonias in the Orient can all too easily lose its elevating influence and slip into actual sensuality. Positive evidence on this score is none too conclusive through the Christian level charges of the sort against the mysteries. At any rate, a popular revulsion set against them and popular leaders denounced them. Then a movement begins to take form to drag the arcane of the mysteries out to the common knowledge and to make the emblems and rites understandable, that is, end quote, to the people. Here's where the catastrophe was invited. the term on which alone mystery, doctrine, and ritual could be made comprehensible, end quote, to simple minds, or the forms in which it would become understood. So what they did simply is they dumbed down the truth. That's what they did. They dumbed down the truth so that people would be able to taste it and be able to chew it. It would be like, something very simple food, not meat. So it's fabricated through the process of conversion of all its allegories and drama into ostensibly objective fact and the taking of scriptural literature as history. This is a course of time, was done, and no one has seen it, studied it, and traced it in process and commentaries effect. So I'm going to stop here because I've been here probably about an hour, maybe a little longer, actually. And we'll start again, maybe today or tonight, maybe not. We'll see, because this is roughly actually an hour and 15 minutes. So it's been an hour and 16 minutes I've done this. So we're probably going to stop here at this point, which he does say something. This is the course of time was done, and no one has seen it, studied it, and traced it, process and calamitous effects more clearly than Gerald Massey. So that's where we'll stop at today, and then we'll probably share this rest of it. It's a pretty long chapter, so we'll come back to this next couple days. And I appreciate your attention. Hope that you can understand what is being told here, spoken of, because it's very important. Because most of us have lost our way, and it basically was dumbed down to make it easy for people to chew it. You see, but lost the whole meaning of it. So we will come back to next couple days, and we'll conclude this particular reading. Again, this is The Shadows of the Third Century, Chapter 10 by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Thank you for being here, and I wish you a good day. You take care, and we'll be back.